that you'll be working with. We'll be discussing your first steps, giving you an overview of the grant program, how it works, talking about your grant agreement, discussing how you can get started on your project and how to receive payments, which is something everybody wants to know about. And then at the end, like I said, we'll take questions. But like I said, please feel free to leave any questions in the chat in the meantime, and we may answer them during. So if we can go to the next slide. And so I'm going to introduce all the members of the staff, the folks here at MHT, and the team from the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture. So next slide. Okay, so your main points of contact throughout the program are going to be your project monitors. And that team is on the board, or on the slide here. That includes Taylor Means, a research grant specialist lead, and Bill Hirsch, capital grants and loans administrator, and myself, Stacey Montgomery. So you can see our contact information there on the screen. But I want to let you know, following the meeting, your project monitor, and each project has one assigned. It's probably the person you've had the most communication with of this team during the process. They'll reach out to you individually, introduce themselves, and schedule an initial meeting or a site visit. The project monitor is going to be your main point of contact throughout the grant. So, and our role and our goal is to support you through the successful completion of your project and spending those funds that you've been awarded. So, alongside that, we're joined by some other folks. We're joined by Chanel Johnson, who's the Executive Director of the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture in the Banneker Douglas Tubman Museum. We're also joined by Caitlin Swaim, the Assistant Grants Manager here at MHT, and she's going to be talking about the important stuff, the grant agreements, and some payment information, and that project summary sheet that everybody's received. So she's going to be one point of contact. The other person that we're joined by is Carolyn Nosacek, who's the easement administrator, who'll be working with any grantees who need to convey an easement, and with the project monitors and grantees that already have an easement on their property. We'll work with you and with Carolyn to go through either the easement conveyance process and then through the easement committee review process. And the emails for them are going to be on the next slide. So if we can go to the next slide.
Thanks, Stacey. Before we move on, I would like Director Johnson to say a few words to our new grantees.
Greetings, everyone. Wow, this is so exciting to be here. The African American Heritage Preservation Program grant is a national model for historic preservation. This grant program actually inspired the National Trust for Historic Preservation Saving Places grant program, which is also an African American grant on a national level. It is important to note that the Maryland Commission on African American History and Culture was born out of the civil rights Black Power movement. It was a product of the Black Power movement. And so in that legacy, the African American Heritage Preservation Grant was the brainchild of the commission to fill the equity gap for preserving the rich and critical African American history in the great state of Maryland that shaped the state's democracy as well as the fabric of our nation. And so with this grant program, as of 2025, we have reached every county in the state of Maryland. You represent the best of Maryland. You represent a critical part of our state and national story. And so we honor that, and we are excited to collaborate with you, as well as to continue to collaborate with our partners in this Maryland Historical Trust. So congratulations to the team and to everyone on this call.
Thank you, Chanel. Thanks so much. I'm really glad you're able to share that with us. I think it's important to kind of center what we're really awarding here. So thanks for sharing that. So with that, what can you do right now to get going on your grant? What are some steps that you could take in the next couple of days? First things first is signing that or completing the project summary sheet that you received via email. Caitlin is going to go through some of the finer points of that during this presentation. So hopefully by the end of this, our goal is that you feel ready to submit that. But if not, please follow up with us so we can help you submit that. Because once that gets submitted, we can start generating your grant agreement. All the grant agreements are going to be emailed through Adobe Sign to you or to whoever's authorized to sign the grant agreement. And again, Caitlin's going to speak more to that, but that's the next step. While you're doing that, you can also sign up for direct deposit through the comptroller's office. This is the most efficient way to get the money from your grant. We do pay directly to the grantee, not to individual contractors. So you or your organization do want to sign up for direct deposit so that you can get the funds electronically rather than it takes a little bit longer to get a physical check for payments. And we'll also be talking, like I said before, about the payment process. But signing up for direct deposit is something you can do right now. It does take a little bit of time. So we recommend doing that now. Another thing is reviewing the capital grants and loans manual, which I will be sending out after this, but also is available on the MHT website. And this is really a lot of that information is stuff we're going to be presenting today, but this is your reference guide throughout the project, the program. And you can use that if, in the middle of the night, you're like, I forgot what my project monitor told me about this. You can look at it then, because we can't answer the phone in the middle of the night, but you can look at it in the middle of the night and feel better about that and then reach out to us the next day. Then the last thing is that if you are a property with an easement, you do want to, Carolyn did reach out to those sites where an easement is being taken, but please follow up on that. And if you have an existing easement, have any questions, or you have a scope of work that you want to have looked at, Carolyn's the point of contact for that. And you have both Caitlin and Carolyn's emails on this slide here. Caitlin, you should be getting some emails from her, and Carolyn, you probably already did. So with that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Caitlin, who's going to discuss the project summary sheet and the grant agreement.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Caitlin Swain, and as Stacy mentioned, I am an assistant grants manager here at MHT. And I will be assisting with your grant agreements and processing payments for your awards. I'm going to talk about the project summary sheet because I think that's for many of you the next step that you'll be doing before you actually receive payments and before you receive your grant agreement. So the project summary sheet is accessible on the MHT online grants portal, and that's the same portal that you use to submit your application. The purpose of this is to outline the budget, the project scope, the timetable of your grant, and really for you to let us know if you need to make any changes. And on the previous slide, I just wanted to note that you can see when you're logged into the portal, you can find the project summary sheet by navigating to the requirements tab at the top of the screen, which is shown here in that red circle, and then selecting new or in progress from that show drop-down menu that's here on the right side of the screen with the large red arrow. The status you select from the show drop-down menu really depends on if you're accessing that summary sheet for the first time or if you're logging in to continue working. So you can click on the form name, which is shown here as that blue hyperlink, and that will open the form and allow you to make edits and submit the requirement. So the project summary sheet confirms information specific to your grant award and includes the name of the project monitor, who will be your main point of contact. And the project summary sheet is really an opportunity for you to communicate any concerns or changes to the project scope or timetable. This is the time we want to hear about those changes. We recognize that some time has passed since you submitted that original application, and we understand that some aspects of your project may have changed. So take an opportunity to update us. Additionally, any particular easement or compliance requirements that may have been identified during the review process will be outlined in that project summary sheet. You must name the individual who is eligible for signing your grant agreement. It's very important that you select an individual who's eligible to legally sign on behalf of your organization. There's a list of eligible titles like executive director, etc., that I'll discuss in a little bit more detail later. If you have any questions about who might be eligible to sign, I would encourage you to reach out to your project monitor. The project summary sheet, on the other hand, does not need to be completed by an authorized signatory. Even if you're not making any changes to the project, we still require that you submit the project summary sheet. Just let us know there are no changes. We cannot start generating that grant agreement until we received the project summary sheet from you. So the sooner you get back to us, the sooner we can get moving on your grant agreement, and the sooner you can begin work on the project and receive your first payment. So The grant agreement. After you submit that project summary sheet, you'll be receiving the grant agreement from me, from Adobe Sign. The grant agreement is a legal contract, so by signing this document, you're agreeing to the terms outlined within it. So please be sure that you read this document in its entirety and that you refer to it regularly throughout the course of your project. It's also important that others in your organization are familiar with the contract and the terms outlined within it, particularly those involved in submitting your request for payment and anyone involved in achieving the project timeline and meeting those deliverables. As this is a legally binding document, it must be signed by someone who's legally authorized to enter into contracts on behalf of your organization, which I'll discuss more on the next slide. We will send you the grant agreement via Adobe Sign to request a digital signature. You don't need to have a special app or a program on your computer to sign the agreement, but please do check your spam folder because these agreements sometimes do get trapped there. You will receive an email from Adobe Sign, and it will prompt you to complete specific fields and specify where to sign the document. Once you complete your signature, Adobe will automatically send the agreement to other parties at the Maryland Historical Trust for additional signature. And you will receive a copy of the final executed grant agreement from Adobe when all the signatures have been applied to the document. If you have been a grantee with us before, you might remember completing the corporate resolution to verify signatories for the grant agreement. And as of last year, we're no longer requiring that step. Authorized signatories. As previously mentioned, your grant agreement must be signed by someone who's legally authorized to enter into contracts for your organization. Below are some examples of common authorized signatories. If you're unsure who's legally authorized to sign on behalf of your organization, check your organization's bylaws. If it's not clear that the representative has legal authority to sign this agreement on behalf of the grantee, additional documentation will be required. So the W-9, also included with your grant agreement, is the W-9, which is attached at the end of the document. You must complete this in order to receive payment from MHT. When you receive it, please fill out the top portion of the form and part 1. The address you use to fill out this form is the address we will use to send paper checks for your grant payments. Sign and date part 2, and please note that this must be signed by an authorized signatory. Because it comes in that grant agreement package, which is already sent to your authorized signatory, it should all be buttoned up. So your organization must be in good standing with the State Department of Assessments and Taxation in order for us to execute your grant agreement or issue any payments. You can check your organization's status anytime at the link included on this slide, and it's a good idea to check the status ahead of submitting your request for payment. If your organization is not in good standing, we cannot process your request for payment, and you could risk having funds recaptured. If your organization is not in good standing, it's usually an easy fix, but we can't do it for you. It's something that you'll have to address. You might be able to fix it online.
And now I'm going to turn it over to Taylor, who's going to talk about getting started with your project.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Stacy. So your next step, your project monitor is going to reach out to you and talk about scheduling a site visit. And if we can't do a site visit, we'll schedule a call or a video conference call with you. But that will be the initial first step for getting your project started. After the site visit, our initial meeting, we're going to develop a list of priorities or for your scope of work. And this list of priorities will be the order for which your projects are ideally completed. And if, as we previously mentioned, if your property has an easement, we'll work together with you to complete the easement alteration change form. So you'll be hearing from either myself, your project monitor, or Carolyn for that change alteration form. You're also going to work with your project monitor to ensure all projects are competitively bid out via our RFP process, which Bill here will talk about shortly. And before signing any contracts or agreements with the contractors, architects, or vendors, we're just going to make sure that you follow the proper guidelines that are installed for our competitive bidding process. Okay, and Bill's going to talk about our RFP process.
Bill, you are muted.
Thank you. I just went through a whole long spiel. Nice to meet you. I'm Bill Hirsch. We're going to talk about RFP solicitation. And so this is one that catches people off guard a little bit. Really just have an understanding that, any work that MHT funds has to go through a competitive bidding process. And this is going to require that you release a request for proposal, or what we call an RFP, so that you can start receiving bids for the work. And the first step is going to be to work with your MHT project monitor, whether that's myself or Taylor or Stacy, to make sure that the scope of work in the RFP is eligible for funding. But make a note that the scope of work that's going to be listed in your RFP may differ a little bit from the scope of work that you submitted in your application. And if your project has an easement, the scope of work in the RFP has to match the scope approved by either the easement staff or the easement committee. And so your project monitor, we're going to work with you to find the best way to solicit your RFP. And the way that you're going to solicit bids is really going to be based on the amount of funding that is going to be used for the project. So if your project is going to cost more than $40,000 for construction work, or if it's over $25,000 for an architect or an engineer, you're going to need to publicly advertise this RFP. That typically is going to require posting an advertisement in a trade publication or a newspaper. That'll be 3 times over the course of 30 days, or you can advertise 1 time in 3 separate publications over the course of 30 days. And we have an ad template that we're happy to share with you. It's going to make that process go a lot easier. And just, keep in mind too, that just because you might be required to publicly advertise an RFP, doesn't mean that you can't also solicit firms directly as well. So if you have somebody in mind who you think might be a really good fit for the project, you can also send them that RFP directly. If your project costs less than the amounts that I just talked about that were required for advertisement, you'll still need to solicit, but you can solicit 6 firms directly. It could be 6 or more. So you won't have to advertise if you're under the 40,000 or under the 25,000 for architect or engineer, but you still have to show that you solicited to at least 6 firms. And you're not really going to be required to have a minimum number of responses. The point is just to show that we attempted to try to solicit the 6 firms. Another thing to think about is that we understand that trying to find the right person for your project can be kind of challenging, especially when you're working in historic preservation work. It's a really kind of highly specialized field. And we're going to try to help you find like the proper tradesperson or consultant or professional type that will need to respond to the RFP. We can't specifically recommend anybody for the work as MHT staff people, but we do have a list of different tradespeople that we can kind of give to you, and it gives you a starting point to help you find the right person for the job. The RFP is also going to include information about your property, the grant program, your approved scope of work, what materials you're going to need to put in the proposal, and the way that you would like the bids to be submitted. It's also going to contain a few forms like the financial proposal form, a qualifications form, a conflict of interest affidavit form. These all have to be completed by the firm that's submitting their proposal. We also have a few RFP templates that we can get to you. They can be tailored for your project, and we're totally going to be helping you guys throughout that process and reviewing your RFP well before it gets to, before you release the bids. And then once we've done with our approval, then you all can release that for bidding. The next slide. So once you receive the proposals, the first thing you need to do is make sure that the bidder provided all the information that you required in the RFP. There's missing items such as qualifications form, things like that. You can work with the bidder to make sure they've included everything before you submit those proposals to your project monitor for their review. And then once all of your proposals have been received and you've given us that information, including all those forms I just mentioned, you're also going to include something called the RFP response template, which you kind of see here on the right of the screen. This is going to be the place where you document how you solicited this RFP. It's going to include things like the name of the firm that you solicited, how they responded, if they decided not to do it, if they didn't respond, if they responded with a proposal, their proposed costs, the qualifications, and whether or not the firm is a certified MBE or WBE. Again, just note you don't have to receive 6 bids, but you still need to list the firms that you contacted and the results of the contact just to show that you attempted to solicit at least 6 firms. And so mentioned MBE, WBE here just a little bit ago. The state has goals for included MBE, WBE firms as a percentage of a total project. And for this grant program, any awards that go toward a total project or a project that'll have a total cost of $200,000 or over will be required to attempt to meet the state's goals. The current goal is for 29% of the total contract to be completed by a certified MBE or WBE firm. However, please note that's really just a goal. And if the goal can't be met, that's completely fine. We just need to show that an attempt was made to meet that MBE and WBE goals. So if you're in a location that there might not be a lot of MBE or WBE certified firms around, we have that understanding. We just have to show, hey, we tried. And even if we couldn't meet that goal, it's perfectly fine. So once we get the proposals and you send them over to us, we're going to go over those with you along with any other contracts or invoices or anything that they may want you to sign. Before you sign them, let's have this discussion because it may mean going back to the bidder for revisions if there's something in the proposal that doesn't meet the program requirements or isn't necessary for the project. That happens sometimes. And the way that the winning firm or individual is going to be selected is going to be the most qualified responder with the lowest bid. Just because they have a low bid doesn't mean that they're going to get the work if they do not have qualifications to complete it. So we're definitely keeping that in mind. And then we're also we have to be, as project monitors, we have to approve the selected bidder and the contract before it can be signed. So once a contract is signed, you'll need to provide that executed contract to the monitor after we've already approved it. And so if you have an easement and the easement committee gave you conditional approval, and approved a portion of your scope, that contract is also going to be reviewed by the easement program to ensure that any conditions that they had have been met in the verbiage of the contract. And this step has to be done before any work can begin. So basically, we need to ensure that what the RFP was submitted for and the information that's provided in the contract meets exactly. And one last thing to think about too is that these contracts, unless there's a very kind of outlined stipulation, they are fixed price contracts. We're not looking for cost plus, so those are things though that we can work out with you whenever it comes time to do your RFP. So.
All right. Thank you, Bill, for that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the payment process going forward. So once you have set up your direct deposit with the comptroller's office, with the state, and those of you who have a preservation easement that needs to be conveyed, the grant and your grant agreement is fully executed. Your scope of work is approved by MHT, and all your contracts are signed. That will allow you to receive payments going forward. Payments can only be released by MHT approved projects and completed work or materials that are purchased. So please make sure that you do not do any work ahead of time without speaking to your project monitor. Payments can only be made to the grantee. We don't pay the contractors, the vendors, the firm directly. We will pay the organization, and the organization is responsible for dispersing those funds to the consultant or contractor. After you submit for payment and that payment's processed, it takes about 30 to 60 days for you to see that payment in your account. And in order to receive any payments whatsoever, your organization must be in good standing with SDAT, which again, that link is linked here. And so you'll be able to access that once you receive this presentation afterwards, or you can always reach out to your project monitor and we can assist you with where to go. A lot of payments are reimbursable with the proper documentation. So for example, if you're required to advertise for your project, once you submit that payment, you can send us a receipt, proof that your advertisement has been posted, and we can reimburse you for that payment. To request payments for other projects, contact your project monitor for following works such as deposit, for deposit. If the signed contract includes the deposit amount or mobilization fee, that is something that we can pay upfront. For completed work or materials purchased, photos of the completed work and receipts or canceled checks for materials purchased also qualifies as a reimbursable expense. Any copies of invoices that have been paid, again, with that canceled check or any receipts. A brief description of completed work or materials purchased have to also be submitted when you request for payment. And materials or a copy of any completed report, drawings, and anything that's associated for the work that you're requesting being funded has to be submitted. For your final payment, in order to receive the final amount of your payment, so usually when you get down to the last 10% of your funds, you have to do a project completion report. You're indicating that you've completed all the spending and the work on the project before the project end date has been met by the grant agreement end date. You'll submit this project completion report, which again is linked here, but we'll also notify you that you've reached that last 10% of your funds, and we'll send you a blank copy of that project completion form for you to fill out. You're going to submit all evidence that all deliverables in your scope of work have been completed. This can be photos of the completed projects, copies of report, however you kept records, you'll submit that with us. And oftentimes we will do a final site visit to see the project. Okay, and again, we strongly recommend that you signed up for direct deposits with the comptroller's office. The information you can see is on the screen here. And again, you'll have it, you'll have the clickable link and this email and phone number at your disposal when we send out this slide deck at the end of the webinar.
So now we're going to pass it over to Caitlin Swain to talk about financial documentation and record retention.
All right. So every grantee is required to retain financial documentation of grant expenditures. This includes invoices, receipts, signed contracts, staff and volunteer time logs. For standard accounting best practice, it's also good to keep canceled checks and credit card statements or proof of payment. If for whatever reason you cannot find an original receipt, then these canceled checks or credit card statements are an alternative or a backup for situations like these. The expenditures must align with the final approved budget line items as listed in your scope of work and included in your grant agreement or in your most recent amended scope of work. This documentation should be scanned and uploaded with each request for payment. We highly recommend that you keep up with your records while you're working through the project scope of work. So collect that proof of expenditure as you go and make sure that you're doing it for all of your expenses. You're required to keep this documentation for 3 years after the project completion date.
Okay, so thank you everyone for listening to us present this part of the orientation. As I mentioned, if you join later, we will have a recording of this orientation and the slide deck and the grants manual. We'll distribute that via email following this meeting. So if you miss any part of it or had a member of your organization that couldn't attend and you want them to watch that, or you just want to rewind and hear everything we say again, you're welcome to do that. We'll share that with you. We're going to take questions in 1 minute. I just want to leave you with a few final reminders. First, like I said, the project monitor is going to reach out to you following this meeting to introduce themselves and to get the ball rolling on the project. But please keep in touch with the project monitor throughout the course of the project if anything changes. So that could include a different person who's going to be handling the grant. Please let us know if there's changes in personnel. If we shouldn't be talking to this person anymore, it's a new person, please let us know immediately or as soon as you know that. Send us responses to bids, copies of plans and reports that are generated by any contractor, or any other issues that arise at the site. We hope everything moves smoothly, but sometimes there are issues that come up, changes in plans. Reach out to us. Don't wait too long. Just let us know. Keep us in the loop. We are, as Taylor mentioned, we are going to be scheduling final site visits. We'll visit your site as well during the course of the project or at the beginning, but we will also schedule a final site visit just to see the end product or the end result of the work. And finally, just can't stress it enough, please make sure that any work that you want this grant to pay for, that it has been approved by the project monitor, both the solicitation process and the payment amount. So yes, and so I see there's some questions in the chat. So we're going to move into that question and answer session. Folks can either raise their hands or put a question in the chat. There was one question that came into the chat, but before I start answering this, again, you can see our contact information here. Like I said, we will be following up, each project monitor will follow up with their grantees, but thank you for attending this, and we're really excited to work with each one of you, and we're here to really support you through this whole process. So I see there's some folks with their hands up. I'm just gonna start here with, there's two questions, one person, two questions, great. Can you give us an example of consulting services? So that might be an architect or an archaeologist or an engineer. It may be ahead of starting your actual project, you might need to have a structural engineer. Maybe you have a large crack in the side of your building. I hope that you don't, but maybe you do, and you need a structural engineer to look at it. That's a consulting service, something like that. And then how long do you have to complete the project? There's a 2-year timeline. And when we reach the end of that 2 years, we can always reevaluate if things come up, but we try to keep it within 2 years and then see where we are. So that it's really dependent. Obviously things happen, but we try to keep it within 2 years. So there's a couple other people with their hands raised. I see Carolyn Putney. Would you like to ask your question? Or Carolyn Putney, I'm so sorry. Oh, okay. Well, Carolyn, you're on mute, but I see you have your hand up. So I'm going to answer a couple other questions in the chat, and then I'm going to go to Reverend Mark Groover over there. And Carolyn, if you, we can't hear you. Oh, maybe you're unmuted now. You want to ask your question?
Yes, I still have a question.
Sure.
I just wanted to know if we're going to get whoever our coordinator is, we will be receiving these contact names, people that we can be able to reach out to, like, for example, Bill Hirsch in the solicitation process, and Taylor Means when we go about setting up our direct deposit and those type of things. Will we get a list of those names?
So each of your project monitors, whether it's Taylor or Bill or myself, can help you with all of those things. We just split up the presentation, but we can all help you with all of those things. So you will get, your project monitor will reach out with to you with that information. And if we can help you, we'll help you get connected to somebody who can.
Oh, that's good to know that all of you will be supporting us. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for that question. I'm going to take one from the chat. I'm going to go person chat. So when you're applying for direct deposit, does Maryland send a confirmation once it's approved? I don't know the answer to that, and maybe Caitlin does. But if not, we can look into that. Is there a confirmation that you're...
I have never seen a confirmation, but if you ask us, we can look in the state payment system and determine if it has been set up for direct deposit. So reach out to us.
And then I'm going to reach out to Reverend Mark Groover. He had his hand raised.
Yes, good afternoon. My question is more of a technical question. The person who email we're using, we need to switch that email. How do I go about doing that?
We can send you some info. If you email us who that is and what who you want to switch it with, we can send you the information on how to do that.
How to switch emails, and when we set up a different password and everything. Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
And who would I send that to before you let me go?
You can send it to me and I'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I see a question, do we need an RFP for the consulting service? Generally, yes. And it really depends. That's why you work with your project monitor and talk to them right away. What kind of service are we soliciting and what's that process going to be? I like to think that the RFP is the right tool. As we said, we do have to take the lowest bidder, most qualified, but the RFP is a great tool to help us identify who the best, help us to, kind of weed out people who might not be the most qualified to do the job, and help us really get the people that we want who are going to best serve our project. So by putting together that RFP, we're really able to hone in on who we're looking for. If you have, some really elaborate detail work on the exterior of your building, you may not want somebody who's never worked on anything like that ever to be bidding, or you may want somebody who can demonstrate they have that skill set. So we're going to use RFP to do that. And if you're working with a historic building, you may not want to use somebody who's never worked with a historic building before. Those are things that the RFP can let us do. But yes, generally we want to use the RFP. There are some times when we don't need to do that, but that's why you always work with your project monitor to properly bid out the project. I see, let's see, Renee, you have your hand raised. McKinney, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. On the deposit part of it, as you well know, you've been working with me, Stacy, and Caitlin also. We're still having that a problem getting the direct deposit. We've done all the steps that we're supposed to be doing, but it's taken them a long time to get, so I'm not sure if we're supposed to start back over again. But I've done everything, but we don't hear anything, but we never received any response, and we're still going. All the checks have to be mailed.
Okay. Well, thank you for letting us know that. And Carolyn,
Okay.
Caitlin, I don't know if you have anything to say on that, but we can keep working on that.
Thank you. I know that they have been very delayed with some of their like setting up the direct deposit process. And so if you sign up for direct deposit and that's being delayed for whatever reason with the comptroller, we won't withhold your payments. We'll still send them as paper check in the meantime until that direct deposit does go through. So don't worry about that. But if you do reach out, I will try to find out. Really, it is mostly something that you have to handle directly with the comptroller, but I can at least see what the status is on my end. But unfortunately, we don't have much more control than that. So,
right. You have helped me in the past, and it's been well over a year. So I guess I just have to go with the mail process. But it is good to have it direct deposit, But I thank you for your help.
Thank you. Okay, and we'll keep looking into that. There were a couple, like I said, I'm gonna go look at some of the questions in the chat, one of which was, how do we find out if we're required to give an easement to MHT? So properties that were required to give an easement to MHT received an email directly from Carolyn Nosacek, our easement administrator, letting them know that and introducing herself. So if you haven't gotten one of those emails, then that's not an issue for your site at this point. And then her other question was, how many bids are needed for a project that is less than $30,000? And that's really dependent on the project. We usually try to aim for 6 bids for all projects unless they're very small. But that's something to work out with your project monitor. $30,000 isn't necessary. $40,000 is for services and $25,000 is for architects, and that's just for advertising. But generally, we try to get 6 bids for each project. And then I see Yvette Young, you have your hand raised. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, I had actually a couple of quick questions for the vendor list. How would we request that vendor list? And also, I'm so sorry, I'm looking for my question here. I apologize.
Well, I can answer that question while you're asking it, while you're looking for the other one, which is that we don't have a vendor list, but we can help you identify appropriate vendors for a specific project that you're trying to to solicit for. So we don't just
Okay.
have like a list that we send out, but we can help you identify folks for an individual project. But again, you're going to be working with the project monitor on that process, so we can help you identify those people. I hope that that's
Okay. And it was for terms and conditions. Do you have general conditions or terms and conditions that you want us to add to our RFP, or that's up to us to build that language?
So we have a template that'll include a lot of that language. If there's something specific that you're interested in adding, we can discuss that.
Okay. And my last question was as far as what's capital eligible and non-capital, is there an outline of how we know, like for drawings and consultant services and other things that may or may not be included in capital or capital eligible? Is there a designation list that we can go to for those items?
So you can link in the grants manual for a start, but but work that is directly related to like plans, engineering reports, things like that that are directly related to the capital project are generally eligible. But that's why, again, before you start anything, before you do anything, please have that initial meeting with your project monitor, talk about your project, what you're thinking about, so they can address that specific concern for your specific site with you. We do pay for a lot of pre-development through this grant, but it has to be directly related to the capital project.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. And I see that Patsy Blackshear has a question. Patsy, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. The question is twofold. One, in terms of the minimum bid level, our project, our program was approved with multiple construction projects, and some of them are large, some are very small. Smallest is like was estimated with getting some pre-bid information estimate information that was like $5,000 reporting. We have to bid on something as small as $5,000.
Potentially, it depends on the type of service. We do have to solicit, you have to at least solicit some bids. It may not be 6, it depends on the scale of the project. And again, that's also in the grants manual, and we can talk about that individually. For much smaller services that are a few $1,000s, it may be just 2 or 3 bids. But it really depends on the scope of services. And again, really, you don't have to get 6 responses. You have to make 6 attempts to get a response. And particularly now, it is very helpful to have multiple bids, so you can have an idea of what, maybe if you only get 1 response, how do you know if that's actually like a fair price, right? And, it allows you to understand what is a reasonable price. So it's helpful whenever possible, but we do understand there are some places where it's really difficult to get more than 1 person to bid on something. But we work with you to try to help get good results and understand what's appropriate for the grant to pay for.
Okay, so the scale can affect that.
Yes. Now, something like repointing may be part of a larger project, masonry work generally, or something like that. So maybe it gets included in a larger project too.
Okay. The second question has to do with the budget itself. We were approved for a certain funding level, and we have estimates of how much the construction activity is going to cost. But when you send these bids out, you're going to get different proposals back. Is a responsive bid also based upon whether or not you're getting bids within a certain range? Because otherwise you could just really shoot your budget. And your budget is your budget.
Yeah, your budget is your budget. And that's why one of the first things we're going to do is really look at the scope of work and the priorities and try to identify what really needs to come first. And yeah, you may have got an estimate for something in the spring and the cost is different now. We want you to spend the funds that you have. Hopefully by competitively procuring it, you're able to find something within that range that you'd initially budgeted for, but that may change over time. And I did want to point out, if you did include an estimate from a contractor, that you are not obligated to use them, but you're welcome to ask them to submit a bid. If there is somebody, if you're, an organization, you have somebody who does the sort of work that you are looking for, you can, and this is another reason the RFP is helpful, or the solicitation process is helpful. You may have someone in your organization or that is associated with you who does the work that you're looking for. You may wish to hire them, you may not. They can bid. They may or may not have the most competitive bid, but if you don't want to sour your relationship with this person by doing business with them, it is also a great way to say, hey, you know what, I had to go through this competitive process, and unfortunately, the state made us go a different way. So it's a great way to protect your relationship with somebody if you don't want to use them, and you can also include them in that process if you do. But they still have to go through the competitive process. So you can include people, and sometimes it's a benefit, and sometimes it's nice to be able to say, we couldn't use you, I'm so sorry. I wanted to put that out there.
Not to extend this conversation, Stacy, but you made a statement that your estimates might have changed, conditions might have adjusted such that your bids come in at a level entirely different one from your early estimates. If that is the case and a component of your construction project is legitimately assessed as requiring more, are there conditions under which a extension can be requested? Or
are you talking about, when you say the word extension, do you mean additional time, or do you
additional
mean
money? Additional.
So we can't increase the amount of the grant that you've received. That's not something that Bill or Taylor and I are able to do. So that's why, again, we're going to prioritize that list of projects. We're going to try to pay for as much as we can with the grant. So if those costs do change, you may then need to look for, if we're not able to get through your full list, that may mean coming back again and reapplying. That may mean looking for other sources of funding or doing fundraising to complete that project. Okay. We unfortunately can't control the prices of things, but no, we're not authorized to increase the funding to your grant.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. I see a couple of questions. One just asking if the federal freeze on grants affects this grant funding, and no, thank you, Taylor, for answering that. It's a state funded grant, so everybody can take a sigh of relief there. And if you do want to make revisions to your project, that would be something we discuss in our initial meeting about what's going on and why you need to make those changes. So please, when your project monitor reaches out to you, think about the things you want to discuss with them, the questions that maybe you thought of in the middle of the night tonight, or whenever before that meeting. You'll please think about those things that you want to ask them specific to your project. I see Carolyn, you still have your hand up. Do you have another question, or just want to put your hand down? Great. Okay. Well, if folks have other questions, you're more than welcome to reach out to us, or we'll stay on for a few more minutes if you want to ask us a question. But we're really excited to have your projects with us, with this group of wonderful projects that are happening this year. We're very, very excited. Taylor and Bill and I and Chanel and Carolyn and Caitlin, we're all here to support you. We gave you a lot of information. It can seem really overwhelming, but you don't have to commit any of it to memory. We will send you that information. We're a phone call, an email away. We're here to help you get through this. We have templates, we have information. We are here to support this project happening. So I want to make sure that everybody is really clear on that. And you can expect, hopefully by the end, I think I'm going to say our goal is by the end of this week that we've reached out to all of the projects that we'll be working with and set up an initial meeting or site visit. So we can talk about any specific concerns at that. And if you have further questions, we'll stay on for a little bit. We're happy to take more, but like I said, we're going to send this presentation out. We're going to send the recording, and I'm going to send that copy of the grants manual to you so you can look through that. And please, we are a resource for it, so don't hesitate to reach out. And with that, I'll say thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.